So as we begin, you just probably saw a message come up that says that this gathering will be recorded. And so if you're uncomfortable with having your face appear on that recording, one option might be to just turn your video off if you wish. But really, they're not going to see a whole lot more. Mostly it'll be whoever the key speaker is. That's likely what they're going to see the vast majority of with this large of a group. Well, my name is Clara Plamondon, and it is my good pleasure as the prosecutor of the Ecclesiastical province of BC and Yukon to welcome all of you here today. Archbishop Lynn McNaughton is here with me as well. I want to acknowledge her, Your Grace, thank you. We are so thrilled that there are so many that have said, yes, we want to have a conversation about what we can do in terms of emergency planning and preparedness in the context of our own communities, wherever we are. And this, I have to say, was a bit of an experiment to try it out and see whether or not we built the field and they came, is what I'd like to say. And so I'm just so pleased at the response we have today. Just as we begin, I just want to begin first by bringing to mind that each and every one of us is somewhere located here in the province of British Columbia and the territory of Yukon, and that we are on the unceded territory of many, many communities. I am in Snuneymuxw First Nation in Nanaimo, and I'm just going to invite you, if you're able, just in the chat, if you would be willing to just type in, where are you located? So that together we can acknowledge that we are truly in a diverse part of the world with many, many nations that we walk with and learn from. Look at them all going, wow, wow. Yes, wonderful. Thank you, thank you. And if you're not able to write in the chat, say it out loud or quietly to yourself. Thank you for that. And we honor the peoples of this land, and we give thanks to God for the journey we are on, a journey of truth telling, learning, and walking together in a spirit of reconciliation. Before I open with prayer, I'm just going to address some practical things around Zoom that will help us to have a more meaningful conversation together. It's not to silence you, but rather to mute ourselves so that we can truly hear and not have inadvertent cross conversations going on. As many of you already know with Zoom, it's one of the hardest things we have. You can't have a conversation in a circle like you would because we cut off each other if one person is trying to speak while someone else is. So I'm going to invite you to mute yourself, and as we move along, if there's a question, we're going to use the chat area. So I can see that quite a few of you were able to find your chat and you were able to successfully post something there. That's good news. And so that will be the location for any questions and points of clarification. Kate Dalton, whom you have been communicating with through our provincial office, is our executive assistant to the Archbishop, and she is one of our gurus at the table, is what I'd like to say. And she is the one that's going to help us and keep track of any issues that might come up. And she'll be helping us to make sure we don't miss any questions as we move along. It's important to remember, though, that if there are more questions than what we're able to address in this 2-hour window, we're going to be recording the chat room transcript. And so that way, afterwards, if there were questions that didn't get named or addressed, I want to just assure you that we will make sure that we follow up and that there will be a reporting back with a bit of a summary and reflections about what we talked about today. One of the things that I'm very much aware of, that when we are having this kind of a conversation, that many of us here at this table, I know, have personally have gone through trauma, who have gone through a disaster or a local emergency. And even in recent times, we can all think of some very difficult realities that we have gone through, which is part of the reason why we are having these conversations today. But if this is something that, as we're talking and sharing our stories and reflections, and you feel that you just need to talk to somebody, that this is harder than you expected, both Archbishop Lynn and I will be seen as support people for this session. And if you need to talk to someone, if you could go to the chat, and if you notice where it says to, and right now it likely says everyone, there's a little tiny arrow just to the right of everyone. And then you can see Kate, who's the host, should be at the very top of that list. If you click on Kate, then you are now having a private conversation just with Kate. And Kate is in the cone of silence, and she will reach out to you and secure some contact information from you. And immediately after this session, either Lynn or I will follow up and reach out with you so that we can continue that conversation. Many of us have our own good support systems already built in our lives and in our own communities, and that might be more appropriate for you. And just remember that too is also a resource for you. Does that make sense? Yeah. So why are we doing this? Well, it started out with a conversation at our ecclesiastical province executive, and we were talking about how during a particular local disaster where an Anglican church opened up its doors when they got wind that there were a multitude of people being evacuated and being brought into their community. Well, you know what Anglicans do. We open up the kitchen, the coffee pot got put on, made some sandwiches, and there was just this rollout. Well, the municipal government that was supporting this emergency was flummoxed. They were amazed that they had no idea that we had that kind of capacity. They had no clue that that was something that we could do, which made us start thinking about, gosh, are we missing out on an opportunity to build relationships in our own communities where we live, and to be thinking about our own responsibilities to the work of emergency planning? How might we be better prepared so that when, and God forbid that it happens again, but the reality is that we know from the last few years that these kinds of things keep happening. And we are called to be missional, to love our neighbor, to want to respond to the needs of our community. There's a reason why Jesus said, when you give me a cup of water, it's like you're giving me that cup of water. We do these things because it's important to be a part of the community. And so we brought in together a task force, and that included myself, Joanne Forsyth from the Diocese of Kootenay, and Kate Dalton, who gathers some good resources and materials, and we've sent that out to every diocese in our province so that we would begin having conversations. And then out of that came the idea that we would want to do some learning, some educational opportunities around all of these things. And at the same time, I encountered some news about what John Hounsell-Drover was doing in his part of the world. And he was just finishing up a thesis on this very topic. And so I immediately reached out to him and said, I think we need your wisdom and your knowledge. And he very graciously and kindly agreed to come alongside us and begin this conversation about how we might learn together. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I just want to offer a short prayer. I'm so excited about the topic. Can't help myself. All right, so that was my whirlwind. Here we are. This is what we're doing. And I'm going to allow the Reverend Lieutenant Commander John Hounsell-Drover speak for himself and tell you a little bit more about himself and why he's at the table as well. But we're so delighted that you're here with us.
It's my pleasure.
But first, let us pray. Gracious God, you inspire us to work together, to be your hands and feet wherever we are. Guide us as we learn how to prepare, collaborate, and engage with our communities in a spirit of love and generosity. Make your presence known in our learning and conversations as we listen deeply for your desire and hope in the work of emergency planning. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
And so I want to welcome John and offer you the floor as we continue our time together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Clara. That was such a good introduction. You've actually done some of the work I felt I had to do at the beginning, giving us a bit of context. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you to you, to the Archbishop, to the province for this opportunity to explore with you all how it is that we might engage in this very important, this valuable work of cooperating and working with disaster and emergency management organizations throughout our different communities, so that we might be able to respond in positive, well-informed and equipped ways. When I was going to university, there was a joke that an expert was anyone more than 5 miles from home with overheads. So yes, I'm still old enough to remember what overheads are. Nowadays, it's all PowerPoint. So in some ways, I'm the expert this afternoon, but really this is a workshop. And I'm confident that most likely today, I'm going to probably learn as much, if not more, from all of you. And at last count, there are 86 of us here online. So I'm sure there's more wisdom out there than just my own. So I'm looking forward to learning from you as well. My personal goal for today is to provide you with some knowledge and to engage you in reflection and visioning. So everyone would have received ahead of time the workshop sheet, and on it a number of questions were highlighted for your reflection beforehand. And I really am going to ask for your input. This is a large group. And we're doing this through Zoom, so that has some challenges. I'm going to ask Kate to help us coordinate responses. So if when I do ask questions, you want to jump in, please feel free to put your hand up. But even if you do put your hand up, please feel free to also respond in the chat line, because as Clara pointed out, we will be recording that, and I will be using that material later on to create a report of all the work that we have done today. So like I said, my goal is to engage you, to be a facilitator, but the overall workshop goal is hopefully to prepare each one of us to walk away with a plan, whether it just be an idea or something a little bit more advanced, for how we might, on a congregational, parish, or diocesan level, to seek ways to work with those in our communities who work in ministries of emergency preparedness. And this is not a new idea, and nor is it something that many of you are going to find new in any way, because I know that some of your churches already engage in these things, but it's continuing that work that I want to highlight for us. So just a little bit of background about myself. Who's this guy talking to you today? Who does he think he is? So I'm going to ask Kate, throw up slide number 1 there, and I'm going to give you the quick shot-by-shot list of who I am. Let's see. Oh, yes, thanks, Kate. There's a reaction button as well. All right. So, John, there I am. In the first picture, I'm in the bottom center. I was extremely shy as a child. That's my grandmother holding me in her arms. And in the second picture, it's me with my current family, right there in the middle. I was born in Ontario. I was raised a Newfoundlander. I have been married to my spouse, Reverend Hounsell-Drover, for over 26 years. My 2 sons, William and Peter, are there. William is 19, Peter is 17. I did a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Philosophy at Memorial University, and then a Master of Divinity at Queen's College, at which time I was ordained and worked in the Diocese of Western Newfoundland. I enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 2007, have been on a lot of different bases, done a few deployments, and I'm currently in my 15th year of service. And I currently oversee all chaplain-related training and doctrine for the Canadian Army. And one of my fields of expertise, one of the areas where I'm called a SME, subject matter expert, is in religious leader engagement, which is how religious leaders communicate with professional organizations in order to align their work. Just as Claire mentioned, I just finished a master's program in interdisciplinary studies, focusing on exactly that interface, how it is that local faith communities can take part in disaster management activities, and not just specifically how, but why. What are the motivations? And it's that work that brings me to you today. The heart of my thesis was an exploration into motivation, really, at the end of the day. Why is it that different communities of faith, regardless of their brand, as it were, would bother to get involved in disaster management activities? And I had some really interesting findings at the end of the day when I had finished my research. One finding, which was absolutely wonderful, was the recognition that there was, in all the faith groups I explored, a central motivation that they all shared: compassion. And I'm going to ask Kate to throw up slide number 2 there for me. Just so you can see some of the variety of faith groups that I interviewed for this study. Thank you, Kate. It was as broad as I could make it in terms of hearing diverse voices. But no matter which faith group I interviewed, as I dug down and asked questions, they all expressed not only a desire, but told me stories of their involvement in disaster response and disaster management activities. And to a person, they highlighted the main tenet of that belief being based in, or those actions being based in, the rule of compassion. And that's something I want to share with you to think about as we move forward. The second lesson that I learned in speaking with all these different groups was that some communities are small in size. And we all know this, but it was interesting in interviewing them and talking about their relationship to disaster management, that because of small size, because of a lack of significant resources, and sometimes just with the description of aging populations, there were some real challenges to how these communities might respond to disasters, whether they be local or international. So one goal that came out of the research, and it's the one that I'm focusing on today, is literally finding ways to facilitate partnerships, and especially for those local faith communities that are smaller, and have to be more creative in how they build these relationships. So I hope I'm able to do some of that work and help you vision some of that work today. And yeah, so that's me and pretty much what it is I'm trying to do. So I'm going to switch the question. I'm going to pull down the, get the slide taken off now, open up the screen again. There we go. And I'm first of all going to find out who you are. Now, there's not going to be time for everyone to share, but I'm going to ask two questions, and they're on your agenda. Why are you participating today? And what is your interest in this topic? So what I'm going to ask is, if you feel a little brave, I'm going to throw it an answer. Again, there's 88 of us now. Hopefully that means I'll get a few verbal responses, but please take the time to answer that question in the chat as well. Why are you participating today? What is your interest in this topic?
My name is Charlene Thompson. I'm with Metchosin Search and Rescue. I'm Metchosin St. Mary's, and I'm also with Search and Rescue and do environmental stuff and radio stuff. And we have an arrangement already between our church and the emergency social services. So they already store all their extra bedding and things like that in our church. And it has been pre-set up. So we've already set it up. But what we get out of it as a church is that in an emergency, they look after the church. They put our electricity back on first. They supply fuel for us. They plow our driveways and things like that. So it's a two-way street. So that's my comment. And I'm interested, and because I'm interested in real life, I'm interested in the same things in my secular life as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Anyone else?
Hi, everyone. I'm Reverend Emily Smith in St. Barnabas in New Westminster. We've just discovered, we just did some research around our neighborhood, and we discovered that in the 2021 heat dome, that one of that our area of New Westminster was the highest ranking of emergency department visits in Metro Vancouver. So here in New Westminster, in our particular area of the city, we're really concerned about how and what way we can support our neighbors. It was quite a shock of all the statistics that we discovered to find out that we were the area with the highest area of hospital emergency visits. Wow. In June of 2021. So we're really trying to wrap our head around that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kate, I believe we have two people with hands up as well.
Gaynor and Lois.
Yeah, that's us. That's us. I'm Lois Jackson. Gaynor and I are from Delta, British Columbia. We are here with the approval of the St. Cuthbert's Church Parish. I was a mayor of Delta for 20 years and on many occasions declared states of emergency here. We had a federal mock emergency, which we planned out and which I chaired, obviously, with all of the players at the table. I think my interest is wondering how we as one church, and I'm sure there would be others that may like to come aboard as well in our community, how we can actually fit in with the organizational plans of the municipality and or possibly the provincial government or regional government if there was to be an emergency of a larger nature. So I'm very interested in hearing how that may be able to be brought about in our community, that we as a small parish can work under the auspices of the municipality as well, to make sure that we're not chasing our tails, so to speak, that it's all well organized and we're all being very useful in what we do. So those are some of my thoughts at this time.
Wonderful, thank you. And I see another hand up there.
Hi, it's Michael Shapcott from the Sorrento Center. We're the Anglican Retreat and Conference Center in the Shuswap. I recognize we're a little bit different than a typical parish church in that we have a couple of hundred rooms that often are being used for people on retreat and other activities. But we have, over the last few years, in conjunction with regional, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous disaster organizations, housed a number of people, climate refugees, floods, fires, that sort of thing. And I just wanted to say that we've found the working relationship with the civil authorities to be excellent. They are quite good. Our big challenge has been that often the people who come are not just simply people who need physical shelter and food, which we're able to provide both of those, but they also have sometimes complex social health or other needs. We had a call a while back from a nursing home that needed to be evacuated, and people had complex health needs. We're not set up to provide any of that kind of support, and we in the end had to respectfully decline because we just felt we couldn't we couldn't take up. So for us, the big challenge is that in some situations people come and present with challenges and needs that are beyond our capacity to support.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And before we go on to the next person, the second question I think is also being answered now as well. So I'm just going to say it out loud so we've all heard it. And that is, what experiences may you have you had with disaster and emergency response, either inside or outside the Anglican Church of Canada? So I'll throw that question out there as well, because it's also part of what we're hearing. So please continue. I think George had his hand up next. Thank you so much.
Hi, yeah, I'm George Wicks. I'm the incumbents warden at All Saints here in Vernon at the present time. Moved here to retire in 2016 from the Lower Mainland. And aside from the involvement in the church, my other volunteer gig was to become a public safety lifeline volunteer with the MBC. And I've been serving as a volunteer member of the Vernon Emergency Support Services since then, and worked extensively through the White Rock Lake wildfires, as well as the Merritt flooding that followed. Obviously, life experiences that you didn't need to get, but was happy to be able to participate in at this stage of life. So obviously, I correlate the two. I'm always looking for avenues as to how the church can support emergency services and vice versa, because I know philosophical or psychological and spiritual health are big factors with people in events like this. So obviously this I'll connect a few dots here.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to take one more answer at this time. Don't worry, a lot of the questions are going to be very similar, so everyone who wants to speak will most likely get a chance. But yes, we'll just take one more response.
I'm assuming that's for me, John. Would that be correct?
Yes, I do believe, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Joy Adams Bauer, People's Warden at St. Paul in Nanaimo. The Reverend Clara is my rector. Moved to Nanaimo 12 years ago, worked the majority of my career in Saskatoon as a communications and public relations expert. I have experience in emergency planning communications with the Ministry of Social Services, a large health region in Saskatoon, and the Saskatoon Public School Division. I attended the Emergency Preparedness College in Arnprior, Ontario, a number of years ago, and was trained as an emergency public information officer. And I believe very strongly in the importance of being prepared in an emergency. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. All right. Well, we're going to move into, for the next half hour, roughly, the teaching part of the afternoon. And the reason why we're doing this is because not everyone is in the same space. Not everyone has the same level of experience, and not all of us use the same language when it comes to disaster management and what it means. And so our goals are huge, but the steps we're going to be taking today are going to be very small, but they are first steps. So don't feel that we're not moving because we're going over some simple things. We are moving, just taking our time to make sure we're all in step as we go forward. So I'll try to make this lesson as painless as possible for those of you who do have some training in disaster and emergency management, but it's going to be it's going to be a grassroots disaster management 101 training for everyone to begin. So the first question I would throw out to you, and I'm just going to take the first 3 responses that come in, is a very straightforward question. We all need to be on the same page. How do we, or how would you define a disaster? Let's not make it too complicated. Just again, throw up your hand. Joy's got her hand up there first. So I'm going to take 3 responses. Go ahead, Joy.
I would say a disaster comes on suddenly. It's the complete failure of something. It could be of epic proportions.
Wonderful. I like it. All right. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else? There's no wrong answers here, because we're all working together with a similar ideas in our heads. I see Elaine, looks like you literally have your hand up there. Elaine Renworth?
Renforth, yes. Hi.
Renforth. Thank you. My eyes aren't what they used to be.
A disaster could be a power outage, a severe storm, a flood, a fire, an earthquake, a snowstorm, or even a chemical spill. That could be some of the disasters that could happen. And in our neighborhood, we're going through some of these with the Trans Mountain pipeline, going through some of our neighborhoods as well. So.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. Good. I'm going to take one more to try to round out what we mean when we say disaster. Oh, we have a hand up, and that's Sue.
Yeah, hi. From Nelson and the Kootenays. I would think it would be anything that happens that overwhelms the normal capacities of a community.
Okay. I'm just making notes. No, absolutely. Anything else to add to that? No, I think that's.
I mean, that can be a pretty broad. It could be anything that is beyond the normal day-to-day capacities of a community, large or small.
Perfect. Okay, no, thank you. It's great. We had 3 slightly different definitions, and in those 3 definitions, we got actually a very good picture of how it is that disasters are generally defined within the specialty of disaster management. Kate, I'm going to get you to throw up slide number 3. Generally, when we talk about disasters, we talk about 3 elements intersecting: a hazard, which is an event. So yes, chemical spill, a flood, an earthquake, a fire. Then there's an exposure to that. So if an earthquake happens in the middle of the Sahara Desert, it's not necessarily a disaster because it hasn't affected anyone. But if the earthquake happens in the middle of, let's say, New Brunswick, some people or structures are probably going to be affected. So there's an exposure element that's involved as well. And the third element, which is just as important in all that, is vulnerability. Because there can be events such as chemical spills, floods, earthquakes, fires that happen in regions and areas that the current setup of the community in terms of preparedness and police forces, firefighters, and all that are able to contain. And so when that ability is overwhelmed, That came in very clearly in the third definition that was offered there. We have a vulnerability. And so when all these things happen together and they create a formula, sometimes it's written down as a mathematical equation, hazard plus exposure times vulnerability. But at the end of the day, it's important to see that all three elements come together to create an event that is a disaster. If it doesn't overwhelm a community, it's an emergency. It doesn't make it any less significant. But when we're talking disasters, we're also talking about those events where the system cannot handle everything that's happening. And usually outside support is required in order to respond effectively to what's going on. So those three elements together. So I'm going to ask Kate to move along to our next slide, because ultimately when we talk about emergency management, we're talking about 4 different phases, 4 ways in which we ultimately can respond to disasters, or at least the likelihood of disasters. And I'm going to describe them very quickly for you. First one is what's called mitigation. And mitigation includes actions taken to prevent or reduce the cause, impact, or consequence of disasters. Like if you know a hurricane is coming down the East Coast, you board up your windows. If the snow is about to fall, hopefully you've got your snowblower filled up and your shovels ready to go and your salt. Maybe you need to arrange to have someone else a phone call away to come dig you out, depending on how much snow you're getting. Mitigation, the things that you can plan to do to mitigate the event that you know is happening or might happen. Including earthquake preparedness kits and that sort of thing in areas where earthquakes are possible, or in tsunami zones, knowing where safe spaces are. These are things that you can know about, prepare so that it's possible that a hazardous event might not turn into a disaster. The second phase, Kate, if you could go ahead to the next slide, is what's called preparation. And this is where mitigation comes to an end. Really, when you, in the case of disasters, we always have to be prepared for the event itself to overwhelm all of our mitigation measures. And so we need to be prepared both individually and as groups and communities to respond to these events by knowing who to reach out to when disaster strikes, developing a disaster preparedness plan, exercising plans. And in my time in British Columbia, in the Victoria area, I remember a number of occasions going through earthquake and tsunami drills. And I've got to be honest, it opened my eyes to the reality of the world around me and made me far more comfortable knowing what resources were out there, just in case the systems of communication and government were damaged by an event. The third phase, we'll just go on to there, Kate, is response. And this is really the one that we often think about when we talk about disaster and emergency management. And that is pictures we see on TV of people going in and implementing disaster response, conducting search and rescue, taking whatever actions are necessary to protect yourself and communicating where support might be found. This is the stuff that the newspaper likes and the news media, because it has some amazing images of heroes and tragedy. But what we do during this phase in responding to disasters is also vital, and is also something that we as local faith communities can play a role in. Finally, the last phase, Kate, is that of recovery. Again, this is another aspect of disaster and emergency management that is often overlooked. But when a disaster has happened, we respond, but we also have to recover. And sometimes that has to do with rebuilding, issues of rebuilding. Sometimes it has to do with issues of healing. Sometimes it has to do with issues of providing support, and often it has to do with learning lessons about what happened the last time so that we are better prepared in case such an event happens again. So recovery is just as important as the other three. And again, another place where faith groups can play a significant role, as I'm sure you can all well imagine. We'll go ahead to slide 8 there. So in all these 4 phases, one of the things that really has a significant effect on who is impacted by disasters is a person's vulnerability. I want to highlight that one. That's the reason why the equation is often described as hazard plus exposure times vulnerability. Vulnerability is a multiplication factor. How vulnerable people are to disasters when they happen is one of the most significant things that we need to be tracking, and that we as a people of faith are often most aware of. And that is that those who are socially excluded, economically insecure, less empowered, those who have fewer assets, those who are among us, as the scripture puts it, you know, the poor, the widow, the orphan, those are the people who ultimately bear the biggest brunt of disasters when they happen. And so it's something that we as local faith communities need to highlight. I'll be honest, as I did my research, the majority of local faith leaders that I interviewed during the research highlighted the fact that an important tenet of their faith group was to seek out and support the most vulnerable. Now think about that. It wasn't just the theme of compassion that was shared, but also the theme that one of the most vital focuses of their faith, and you saw the plethora of faith groups represented, is to find ways to seek out and support the most vulnerable. And in our society, as in most societies, that includes women, children, the elderly, those with disabilities, ethnic minorities, and those who are poor. I want to just switch gears for 1 second and go into a little bit of a technical piece, because I want to ask a question in a minute. And just take a look at my time. Oh, I'm still doing great. All right. Could we move ahead to the next slide then? So don't worry about this slide too much. I just want to focus on 2 words, but I want to give you a context. One of the things we study in disaster and emergency management are the types of organizations that respond when disasters happen. And I'll just name the 4 of them. There are established organizations, kind of like in the US FEMA, or here in Canada, government and provincial disaster response teams. In the military, we have the DART team, Disaster Assistance Response Team. These are established organizations that when a disaster happens in an area, they're quick to respond. They're already there, ready to go. And it's their mandate to respond in times of disaster. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are the emergent organizations that respond in times of disaster. These are things that didn't exist before, but crop up and just happen in the midst of a disaster because of a need. And my favorite example of that is, if any of you remember, the Cajun Navy, which arose during Hurricane Katrina, which was basically a whole bunch of local boat owners in the southern US who banded together to try to rescue as many people as they could in flooded areas. They didn't exist before, and they completely disbanded afterwards, but they set an example that has been followed in similar events in the U.S. since, that a local Navy just made up of local boat owners spring into action when floods happen. The other two kinds of organizations, though, are the ones that are the words that I want to focus on, because it created a source of concern for me when I was doing my program. The first one is extending organizations. And these are organizations kind of like a Canadian Tire or a local business. And when a flood or snowstorm or hurricane or earthquake happens, these organizations have the capacity and may decide to reach out and provide support. They might help raise funds. They might give away shovels during a freak snowstorm. They may provide space in their buildings for people to warm up. In either case, when they do so, they're doing something that is outside their normal mandate. They are extending who they are to respond to what is happening in the world around them. Extending organizations. On the other hand, there are expanding organizations. And these are organizations like the Red Cross. We often think of the Red Cross as probably established, but the Red Crosses are a relatively small organization at the end of the day, but it expands. It creates spaces and coordinates and invites and sometimes hires people. So there's hiring, seeking volunteers to grow, to meet needs in different areas. So they expand, but the reason why they do that is because that's who they are. They expand in times of disaster. Another example of an expanding organization in a time of disaster is, I'll go back to the Canadian Armed Forces. We do have our DART team, which is dedicated to responding to disasters. But what happens after a DART team goes in and looks at what's happened in an area and assesses what's happening? It expands, and the Canadian Armed Forces are then able to come in and provide fuller support. So they expand. Why? Because it's part of their mandate. It's part of who they are. When discussing types of organizations in one of the classes I was in, we entered into quite a colorful discussion as to whether churches, faith organizations were expanding, where they respond to disasters because it's part of who they are, or extending, where it's a nice idea. It's something they can do if they want, but it's not their primary agenda. And once the disaster's passed, it's not their concern, again, because they have a different agenda at the end of the day. So think about that. Think about your own faith organization and how you would define your local faith community. In times of disaster, would responding be an extending activity where it's something that's outside of who you are, but something you'd like, you think, hey, it's a good idea, let's do this? Or would you think of yourself as expanding, where this is actually a part of your identity, and in times of disaster, it's time to get creative and find ways to expand to meet that? So I'm actually going to open that question. I'm going to ask Kate to take down the slide, and I'll say the question one more time for you. How would you describe the relationship between your local faith community, the Anglican Church of Canada for the most part, and disaster and emergency management? Would you see yourself as extending your mandate or expanding to fit a need that you've already considered? And there's, again, no wrong answers. And I want everyone to take the time, think about it, and write your answers in the chat as well as raise your hand. I've got one expander thrown up. This is good. Oh, there you go. Here come the responses. All right. Lots of expanding and extending there. No, I want to see as many of the answers as I can get. Extending, expanding. This is exactly what happens when I end up asking this question in groups. I'll be honest with you. It's almost 50-50. It's almost always 50-50. And I'll be honest, a little bit of bias on my part. I can't imagine, from my own perspective, describing the church as anything other than expanding, but that's because that's my mindset. There's nothing right or wrong about that. It's just that's how I think of churches that I've been a part of. But extending is a very real reality, and we'll get into some of that for a bit. Oh, this is great. Oh, this is perfect. It really is almost a 50-50 as the list comes up. All right, I'll wait for another minute or two. And is there anyone who would like to put up their hand to have something to say about this expanding, extending issue from your own experience? Because I know many of you have experience with disaster and emergency management. Oh, everyone's gone shy. Now, come on. You had lots of answers the last time. Whoop. Go ahead, Clever.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about right now, my answer was I'm struggling between the two definitions. I'm not sure that it's that cut and dry. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we would probably be more comfortable defining ourselves as extending as opposed to expanding, which is where, like you, my heart wants to say this ought to be seen as this is part of who we are and what we're about, and not just oh, by the way, if this happens, well, yeah, I guess we could do that. But I think the reality is that our mindsets are still in the extending model because of all kinds of good reasons. So I'm conflicted.
No, absolutely. That's good. The confliction is a good thing. I had to learn to be conflicted. Trudy, yes. Oh, Trudy.
There we go. Sorry. I think we need a little bit of both.
Okay.
Just so we get different ideas from and different perspectives.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, no, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trudy. See, George, you got your hand up again. Look at that. Us Islanders got to stick together. Go for it.
I just said expanding and extending because, you know, at All Saints, we have, for example, a weekly street lunch program where, you know, we provide an ongoing ministry to more vulnerable people on an ongoing basis. So that's why I said expanding, but in the meantime, there are a whole bunch of things that could come up in a major disaster that we're not regularly doing right now. For example, a church hall could be a group lodging center. That's not something we're offering on a day-to-day basis. So that would be something that in a particular situation, we could extend this as part of our ministry and our support to the community.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. All right. Bishop Stevens, I believe.
It is. Yeah. Thanks, John, very much. Just a comment from you, actually. I'm wondering, I think time makes a huge difference in this, as in, is this something that's ongoing and long-term? Because a lot of churches are responding to something that is long-term, such as food for those in need. And actually, I also think of COVID, honestly, as does that fit into this category? And obviously, in many ways, it does. But 3 years is a little bit different than responding to the immediate needs, say after an earthquake. So I wonder if you could comment on that, because I think it makes a difference too in terms of the comparison around extending or expanding. Because I think timeline is huge in that, and because there's so many issues that churches are either trying to respond to or might respond to. I think of also the drug overdose that's throughout the or tainted drugs throughout the province. Again, a huge concern, and housing and homelessness is also another huge concern throughout the province. Both of which demand, I think, both. So anyway, just curious how your thoughts on timeline.
Okay, wonderful. No, thank you for that, Bishop Stevens. That's some good highlights of areas that we don't often think about when we think about disasters. But you're absolutely right. They do fall under our purview because they are often examples of where our current system is unable to respond well to the needs, whether it be food needs, whether it be needs of the community that are struggling with substance abuse in terms of drug overdoses, homelessness and housing issues. These are issues that are more a slow burn sort of event. They're not fast, they're not sudden, but and sometimes they're like a train wreck. We can just watch them happening. But how we respond to that, knowing that our resources are unable to meet or to match, or unwilling to meet or match. I'll even go that far, be a little bit political on it. Our role in that is a form of disaster management, whether it be to reply, be those who provide food through food banks, make sure that people get good information with regards to COVID and the pandemic, whether we educate people about addictions programs that are available and even provide them ourselves, and so on and so on and so on, whether we aim at the heart of the issue or the symptoms. We are doing disaster and emergency management. So thank you for highlighting that all plays a role. Sometimes you're right, we do get caught up in the big ticket events like the hurricanes, and I always think of a tornado. That's a disaster. Yeah, but so is environmental change. Environmental change is a huge disaster. So thank you so much for that. And I'm going to ask Josie, and it's so good to see you to jump in there. Oh, you got to unmute yourself first.
There we go.
Oh,
Okay, well, I think that we've been commissioned by Christ to always be looking beyond ourselves. And if we are not in the expanding role, if we are in extending role now, we should always be striving towards the expanding role. We should be always looking outside of the box and beyond ourselves to see what we can do in our local and broader community. Whatever we do, we can't stay focused inwardly. And to me, just helping, sometimes that's all we can do, but still, if we just focus on, oh, there's a need here and we can do what we can there, we just got to keep our minds open to growing into the expansion mode. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josie. That's very well put. Thank you. Finally, I'm just going to take lastly, Gaynor and Lois.
Hi, again, Lois from St. Cuthbert's Delta. It's very difficult because I agree the extending is almost half and half, and it has a lot of dependence upon a couple of things. One would be capacity. What is the capacity of your parish? What are the age groups? Is this a physical need, or is it less than physical that is needed? We're also looking at coordination with other groups. Maybe you have a need for 100 beds to be set up in your church. Is everyone else looking for beds as well? What are the coordinations that you need? Plus, communications is one of the most difficult, because today, with everything we see online, you'd think it would be easier. But in my opinion, it's much more difficult because everyone's going in a different direction, and you all have to be going in the same direction in order to be efficient. So these are a lot of things that are at play here. And for our little church, we certainly have a much older congregation. And does that have an effect on how you can be effective? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that as well. This is great. Hey, Clara, I don't know if you actually needed me to do this workshop, because the wisdom is there. Everyone has the answers, but
I know.
that's perfect. But I think sharing the answers is the real gift here. Before I go on to my last slide, I don't want to leave anyone out. I saw John Metzger just put his hand up, so I'm going to give him space for a minute before I throw out my last slide before we have a break. Oh, John, you're muted.
I'm John from Salt Spring. Our church is centrally located. We're on the hospital grid from a power point of view. We have heat pumps so we can keep cool in the summertime. We have an agreement with the Salt Spring Emergency Program already. We house a 20-foot container on our property, which has emergency supplies in it. What we would like to do is to renovate our bathroom facilities so that we would have showers on board. That would cost some money. If you have sources of funding for that sort of thing, please let us know. We have, and in other words, we're already well situated to deal with emergencies associated with climate change, fire, earthquake on Salt Spring with our present facilities. And we'd be happy to expand and extend, whichever word you would like to use, those capabilities. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to ask Kate to put up slide number next. I can't remember, is it 10? Yes, slide 10. I think only you would know. I'll tell you. Oh, there you go. I'd like everyone just to take a look at this. This is a quote directly from my thesis. It was quite an eye-opening one. But the key part in it is the recognition, as I mentioned before, that everyone responds in their own way, and different faith communities can only respond from where they are. And so that's where the issue of expanding or extending really the rubber hits the road, as it were. Really, we'd like to use both words in some way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, the very last phrase there, which I've been carrying around with me ever since doing the research, many local faith communities are practically extending. That's all they can do, even though the commonly expressed ideal was to be expanding. And so that phrase I've been repeating over and over, kind of as my mantra after doing this research, and was just to echo really what Josie said earlier is exactly it. Sometimes extending is all a community can do because of a variety of different reasons. But again, the vision, the idea of who we are as a local faith community is to see ourselves as with an aim of expanding. We respond because we must. It is who we are. But finding a way to do that involves a lot of practical decisions that depend on our local situation. One of the things that I've heard a lot of people mention so far, and I'm going to be honest with you about, are questions of how. How do we do this? How do we do this? I'm not going to be telling you how. I want to be honest and upfront with you on that. The reason is because there are, and I'll look, 87 participants, and my response to one person is going to be different from that of another person. But I'm hoping that, number one, through all the sharing that we do today, we're going to hear a variety of ideas, a variety of hows that we might be able to take and run with in our own local communities, in our own local faith communities. And if there are challenges, we can still build on that in the future as time goes on. But the most important thing to find at the end of the day is, number one, a desire to respond, to name that and how you and your community might respond. And from there, seek ways to do so. And again, every community is different, so the how is going to be different. So there you go. Just want to leave you with that really great news. I'm not going to be giving you answers. I'm going to be throwing questions at you. I'll ask Kate if she'll throw it on that slide. And here we have worked in for everyone's pleasure what was a 10-minute break and is now a 5-minute break to get a drink of water or a cup of tea, as a good Newfoundlander should. Whatever it is you need to do to clear your brain, walk around a little bit, stretch your legs, and then we'll come back for the second hour of our session. And thank you to everyone who has shared so far. This has been great. I must say, everyone's on time. This is awesome. I wish I could get some of my chaplain to be just. That's not fair, but clergy, what are you going to do with them? Really, it's like herding cats, to be honest. You all know this. All right, so I'll just double check. Clara, do we have you?
Yes, you do.
Awesome. Thank you, Clara. And Kate, we have you.
Yes, you do.
All right, perfect. Just want to make sure, because I can't do this without you. I really can't. So first hour of this 2-hour session is over. This time I knew was going to go very quickly. So we're going to focus for the next 20 minutes or so on gathering in some information, some very vital information, and putting it together so that we can learn from one another. And I'm going to be throwing out some of my ideas as well. All right. So you'll see on the coordination sheet 4 questions falling under the topic, what does partnership look like? Because ultimately that's what we're talking about. A partnership between our local faith communities, our congregations, our parishes, even our diocese, or even our ecclesiastical province, and disaster and emergency preparedness management organizations. So the first question that I'm going to throw out there, and again, I'll ask you to either throw it into the chat line or respond by raising your hand, is who are some possible partners in disaster and emergency management with whom we can work, or maybe we're already working. So I'll throw that out there. Some answers are coming in already. All right, but also, like I said, please feel free to raise your hand. Oh, John, and you mentioned a few already, but I'll throw it back to you again.
Just throwing it out. We are a partner with the Salt Spring Island Emergency Services.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm just going to read through PWRDF, local government, non-for-profit organizations, community centers, fire departments, SPCA, food banks, roofing companies. Oh, nice. That's interesting. EMS and established groups such as the Salvation Army. Yes. Emergency social services. And again, part of the reason why I want us to respond in the chat and vocally through the recording is that this is all vital information that we can all share. I cannot answer this question for you. Maybe for the Church of the Advent, for those of you who are there, I know that area very well, so I already know some of the organizations with whom you can connect. And I know you've already connected with many of them, but I can't speak for any other congregation, to be honest. I wouldn't be able to speak for many parishes here in Ontario either, because I'm relatively new to the community. Municipality governments, good. Federation of Labor, Communications networks such as TELUS, Red Cross, other faith expressions. Interestingly enough, my research started with input from the Victoria Interfaith Society. And actually, they were the ones who provided my, my interviewees for my research. And they were formed in response to disaster preparedness questions that arose at a ministerial meeting. And so they actually, instead of being an organization that decided they wanted to extend, their very founding was based on a response to disasters and how they might respond together. So yeah, local unions, that's nice. All right. Wow, lots of really good ideas there. Local ham radio operators, highly undervalued. You're right, Josie. That's a, we often forget how delicate our communication networks really are. With a power outage, if everyone loses their cell phones, we have to become very creative very quickly, just in terms of basic communication with one another. We found that out in Haiti in particular, where everyone had quickly moved to using smartphones. And once the earthquakes happened there was almost no communication because very few people were relying on landlines anymore. Coast Guard, yes. Especially in Alberta, you need to be checking in with the Coast Guard. That was a joke. It's okay. All right. Okay, no, this is great. All right, so we have some really good, a really good list of possible partners. As you can see, the list is as long as your arm and longer. And it again, it invites creativity. There are many different types of organizations, and really it's up to your imagination to explore what groups might be able to partner with you. I mean, the most obvious ones are, you know, police and firefighters and emergency preparedness groups, but sometimes our response might involve getting connected to another local faith community. Again, if you're talking about having issues having challenges, I'm sorry, with regards to whether you're extending or expanding, maybe in a certain area, there's no group large enough to respond, but a number of faith groups working together might be able to respond. And they might be able to coordinate with other nonprofit organizations such as the Elks, the Lions Club, and so on, Rotary clubs and that sort of thing. So partners are very broad, and I've seen a really good representation of that. Howard just mentioned knowing who our neighbor is before the disaster occurs. Absolutely vital, very important to build those relationships before disasters happen. Oh, we have here we go. We have a camera kind of dancing around there. All right. Let me move on then to the second question. I'm going to do the same thing, open the floor. What kind of relationship do we want to build with these partners? And we've already started exploring some of those things. What kind of relationship do we want to build? And I'll give you a sense of what I'm looking for here. Are we going to partner with other organizations? Are we going to help communication? Again, one of the groups that I worked with in my research talked about providing space in their local worship space for disaster managers to come in to give presentations on earthquake preparedness and that sort of thing. So they were really partnering for communication. Sometimes the relationship has to do with resources. And to be honest, historically, that's often the role that faith communities play when disasters happen. We have people, money, and space, and sometimes a nice industrial kitchen. And so when disasters happen, we have resources that we can bring to play. So we're a resource giver at that time. But again, there are more ways than that in which we can partner with other organizations. Liaison is one that just came up there, including I'm just looking, sorry, the chat was moving on me there. And also hosting public disaster preparedness workshops. Again, it's great. As I mentioned, one of the partners that I did research with highlighted this. Buildings that are underused. Yep, no, that's so resource giving, resource providing in terms of disaster. But again, what kind of partnerships? What could we be doing? What else might we be doing together? I'm going to throw it out to John for a second.
Sorry, I'm back again, but
it's all good. It's all good.
But you know, you can't wait till a disaster to sort this out. You've got to do it beforehand. And in our experience here, we have established a memorandum of understanding where we have a plan in place so that the emergency folk on Salt Spring know, in the case of an emergency, that they can come to us. So in other words, plan ahead. You don't wait for an emergency to start thinking about who to contact. Make sense?
Absolutely. No, thank you, John. No, and that's a key piece. I just saw the word pastoral come up there. You're absolutely right. And one of the themes in the research that looked into how different faith communities have been involved in disaster response over the past 10, 15 years, really focused on the capability of organizations, local faith communities, large and small, to play a role because they built the relationship early. So sometimes the beginning of that relationship might simply be reaching out and saying, hi, we're Saint so-and-so, and you're our fire station. And here are your volunteers. And we would like to know you, and we'd like for you to know us. And so on and so on. Just name your group and where you're located. And even that in and of itself creates a connection, a relationship that can build as time goes on into, as John pointed out, memorandums of understanding, if you want to be that formal, or it might just be opening doors. As faith groups, we sometimes, and this is the next topic I'm going to bring up, we sometimes have challenges that we face when it comes to working with disaster and emergency managers. We did try to have a representative from a local disaster and emergency management organization to be part of this workshop today, but it was a challenge. And Clara, I know you tried because I tried myself, and it was very hard because there's always the question in the minds of disaster and emergency managers, whether they be police, fire, or provincial or municipal. What's the agenda of the church here? What's the church trying to get out of this? Is this a tool for proselytization? Are they coming in to save souls for Jesus or get water for those who are thirsty? And as we know, it's probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, but the reality is in times of disaster, we are, for the most part, looking at providing those basic essentials and building that that trust with our partners that are out there and our potential partners that are out there. So I'm going to ask the question. I've already given one answer. What do you think might be some of the challenges out there of working with our partners in disaster and emergency management, outside of the bias that we still struggle with? And we have George. Yes, George.
I'm going to be competing with John for airtime here, but I have to I guess reiterate what he said about being prepared for this kind of stuff in advance, and I commend him for having a memorandum of understanding. One of the things we constantly discuss in meetings I go to at ESS is circumstances that could involve liability issues. And so without raining on this parade in any way, shape, or form, because we all want to do the right thing, wanting to do the right thing and getting to a position where you can actually do it safely without a myriad of issues that could come into play is something that requires forethought and planning. It makes it a lot harder to jump into it. Like, for example, I know we have the space at our church to offer group lodging, for example, in our basement facility. When I think about it from the other side, from the ESS perspective, there's so many questions would have to be asked, so many things would need to be sorted through before we could make that a physical reality. And you know, there's very few, I'll go back to my roots here, but you know, there's stories and musicals made on the situation in Gander, Newfoundland after the 9/11 catastrophe. And it's wonderful to look at, because it's wonderful to look at, and we could only hope for a world like that. But we're always being told and conditioned about liability issues. I was involved with potentially setting up group lodging in the face of a lack of accommodations for people during White Rock Lake. And I had a bin of paper and legal documents as wide as my desk here. And I won't belabor it, but I'm just saying that's a big, the preparedness is the big thing here.
Yeah, no, absolutely, George. Just to build on that, it is one of the main, one of the real struggles in moving forward in this activity with our partners, and it was just highlighted again in our in the chat window, which is excuse me, the issues of liability and insurance and that sort of thing, and that takes time. That takes time to work out. It depends on each organization's insurance policies and what it is you're offering to do. It may, the way that you support may be something simple that doesn't require considerations of legal liability, but it can indeed involve those things. A local example here in Kingston, St. Mary's Cathedral, the Roman Catholic Church here, is in the process of building rooms for the homeless here in the Kingston area. It's a huge issue here in Kingston, is homelessness. And they've run against a whole bunch of litigation and insurance issues because of capacity and not being a fire hazard, but concerns from with regards to safety and fire concerns and fire code. And so they were ready to go up until December, when everything, the brakes got put on, and now it's time to think again, but they're still working towards it. They're still trying to find ways. And again, if they can't do that right now, they will continue to focus on addressing homelessness, which is the disaster they see around them, in different ways, but continue to work in that vein. So again, working, knowing that some of these things are long-term really requires that connection earlier rather than later. So thank you for that. I'm going to go to Patricia next. I think she had her hand up.
Unmute, that's it. Right, okay, my accent will give it away, so I might be a bit ignorant as to the various services and how they correct, so forgive me if I get this wrong. But I'm thinking my husband had to go to the very north of Norway and Sweden to watch a disaster. It was a planned disaster, and they had cross-border, they had the Swedish and they had the Norwegians all responding to this disaster, and they had to discover where the problems were. And I'm thinking about cross-provincial, because if you have an earthquake on the borders of Alberta and BC, what's the compatibility? Do those fire tenders have the same size bolts or whatever they need? You know, how compatible is it?
No, absolutely. Yes. No, thank you. That's one of, that's a very good observation. I'll go back to one of the participants in my study who talked about having disaster managers come into their local church. It was the United Church. And making it clear that one of the things they would love to do is provide kitchen space, a warm kitchen, and they had a rather large building, and so kind of a shelter space. And one of the things they learned in response to their offer was that their building was indeed not earthquake, well, nothing's truly earthquake proof, but earthquake resistant, and their kitchens were not up to a code to serve people who just walked in off the street. So their response in turn, because they had this conversation beforehand, was they spent a couple of years making their building safer and bringing their building up to code so that they could, in the event of a disaster, be a resource for the local community. But that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't this conversation ahead of time, whether it be a conversation or, as you described, an exercise, which is also a wonderful way to work with our partners. It gives us the opportunity to shake things out and say, okay, what would work, what wouldn't work? How can we really help? Because we can't do everything, but we can do some things, and all those little things mean a lot at the end of the day. I'm just going to leave, let's see, I got Sister Ingrid and then Fran, and then I'm going to move on to the next question.
Thank you. The reason why what I really wanted out of today was to talk about exactly the liability and the insurance issues. So Church of the Advent has had more than 20 years of a memorandum of understanding with our local ESS coordinators. And so it's so old that they've changed the names of the laws, and we had to update that. And when we read through it, they say whatever's damaged, they will replace, and all of that was fine. And then suddenly we thought, hold on a second. We were told by our diocese, our synod office, that we had to report if we had an overnight shelter in our building for the purpose of insurance. What will insurance say if they know we're a disaster center? So let me just be clear and say we will be a disaster center. However, what would really be helpful is if at a higher level of church hierarchy or management, we could have some kind of a clarity around the issues of risk and an agreement with the insurance insurers that we all use, all of us use for our churches, that says it is understood that in the case of an emergency, the building may be used as an emergency disaster reception center, rather than each of us trying and going and begging with the insurer and possibly having an increased insurance rate for something that may or may not happen. Just seems to me that there's power in unity here, and that having a combined voice and a combined strategy may be helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is a wonderful point. I took a few of your points down because I like to build on them a little later. So when you hear your words come back again, know that I'm quoting you on that. So thank you so much for all that. Fran, I'm just going to take Fran. Deborah, I'm going to wait. I'm going to pass on you this time because I want to get on to the next question, but I'll throw Fran in as our last person for this question.
I'll also be brief because others have touched on it, that you need to constantly update, because there's people changing on both sides in the parish and in the other groups. And quite often the parish thinks they've got a plan in place because they made it 15 years ago, but it's not the same people in charge anymore, so they have no idea that plan's even there or what it was. So,
no, absolutely. Yep.
Ongoing.
Absolutely. So yeah, so there's two sides to that. It's building those relationships and then maintaining those relationships, because as we all know, if we're not in contact with those with whom we say we're in relationship, we're not really in relationship anymore. We've kind of fallen out of that relationship. So it does take some work. It does take some commitment. But sometimes it's as simple as a phone call from time to time, I'll be honest with you, to make even the simplest of connections, right to the point of having these, as John described, memorandums of understanding. There's a whole spectrum of ways in which we can work with our local partners. And I'm hoping that more and more, as we share more and more, you're hearing more and more ideas of how that might work in your local setting. I'm going to go on to the last question now. And the question is, what is it that we bring to this equation, to this relationship? And we may bring a lot of things, but what I'm getting at is there anything unique that we as local faith communities might bring to our partners in responding to disasters? Yes, we have buildings, but so does the Lions Club. Yes, we have kitchens that we can use, but yes, so does possibly the local school cafeteria. Is there anything that you can think of, and I invite you to either raise your hand or throw it in the chat, what can we bring to this process of mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery as a local faith community that might not be found anywhere else? This is a tough one, but it's also an easy one. We can bring hope. I like it. Amen. A non-anxious presence. Absolutely. We offer loving service. I love it. 2,000 years of disaster recovery experience. Absolutely. I like the example of my favorite example in the Bible of disaster management is Joseph, when the Pharaoh has the dream. There's a disaster coming, but there was no disaster at the end of the day. There was lots of food for everyone, but it could have come. Compassion, absolutely. Prayer, yeah, prayers. That's bringing positive news and prayers, unconditional love and service. As long as we have 5 fishes, I like it. Again, it's that hope, that vision. All right. I'm going to share with you a little story, and please feel free to continue. Fill up that chat space with other things that you think of, because again, we're recording all of this, including the chat. I'm going to ask Kate if she could put up slide 11. This is a story from my research. It's not in my thesis, but it was during my research. And I was exploring the relationship between faith communities and disaster and emergency response. And one article that I read really opened my eyes to the reality of what faith groups and faith leaders bring to disaster and emergency management. I'm sure you all remember the Boxing Day tsunami of 2004. And the picture on the left there is a picture of one of the many islands in Sumatra that were in many ways flattened. I was very careful to try to choose photos that were not too triggering, but because some of them even I found hard to look at. But it's worth noting that this area that is affected on the left side, that whole area, these communities were wiped out in minutes. So it's not like there was a slow flooding that happened here. This was unbelievably fast that things happened. And so we all know about the disaster, and the response was immediate from around the world. Governments, non-government agencies, all came into the region in various ways and forms to find out how we could respond to what was going on. At the end of the day, and I use at the end of the day a lot. My wife points that out to me, I apologize. When these groups got on the ground, their first reaction was to do what they normally do. Okay, there are buildings that are flattened. There are people that are hurting. There's no infrastructure. People need water, food, shelter. So let's meet with local people and get the food, water, and shelter organized as quickly as possible. The people weren't interested. They were in grief. They were struggling with what had happened and were walking around wounded in their hearts. When, out of frustration, there was one NGO, which that I read in the research, one of their frontline workers went to a local faith leader to say, what can we do? How can we connect better with your community? Because we're trying to help, but nobody is coming to these centers to get water and food and tents and that sort of thing. Are we not communicating things clearly enough? And the local faith leader said, no, you're communicating just fine, but we don't need water and food and tents right now. We need to bury our dead. We need to find those who are missing, those who are lost, those who have perished, and we need to put them to rest before we can take care of ourselves. It was a religious need at the end of the day. Some would say a human need, but in this case, defined specifically as a religious need that the NGO did not really track because it wasn't part of their agenda, not at least in the first couple of days of disaster. And on the right side there, you actually see an image of one of the mass graves from Sumatra, where people had the opportunity to come together in as efficient a way as possible to lay their loved ones to rest so that they can feel that they've honored their family and their community from a religious perspective, and then move on to rebuild and to recover. It was a uniquely religious response at the end of the day. And that awareness of the human condition, our relationships to one another, that what we call in the military, the soft issues, those in many ways, especially during disasters, end up being some of the most important issues. And so one of the huge values of religious leader engagement and integration with local faith communities is to hear the voices of the community, to hear the voices of the community and everyone in the community, because churches tend to be one of the few places left in our society where class means nothing. The most affluent and the least affluent of any community will be found within its doors. And it's a place where all can be heard and needs can be expressed and responded to. So I just wanted to highlight that for you, and I'm getting lots of stuff on the chat. Music, hugs. I like hugs. Good one, Josie. Like it. Space to breathe. Yeah, there was one community. It was the Hindu community in the city of Victoria who talked about during COVID that one of they didn't really know what to do. But what they did do was they opened their doors and they wanted to create home. That was the word they used. They wanted to create home. So anyone who wanted to, you didn't even have to be Hindu. They tried to spread the word as far as they could. You know, this is a hard time for everyone, but please come in. You have to be masked. You have to be you have to be socially distanced. But you can come in and we can provide you with a warm coffee and an opportunity just to talk with other people at a respectful distance and feel that you're not alone anymore. We'll provide home for people. That's not something that every organization is going to think of. But for the Hindu community in Victoria, it was the one thing they felt they could do in the midst of a pandemic where everyone seemed to be drifting further and further apart. So, all right, let's see, what time do we have? 7:43. All right. Woo, we're getting close to the time. I've got to keep an eye on this. All right, let me move on to the last two questions, which I'm actually going to throw out the window because I want to focus on a more specific question, and this is really important. And I can't believe I hadn't listed, well, it's actually the last two questions. So the first two I'm going to leave, external and external resources. I'm going to focus on the last two questions. What are some first steps that we can make after this workshop is over? So think about that. What can we do? We've talked a lot. We've shared a lot of really good information together about disaster and emergency management and how local faith communities can play a role. What can we do from here when we end this seminar, when we end this workshop? What are some ideas? What are some goals that you can articulate and take back to your local faith community in those first steps of engaging in faith and community, in disaster and emergency management? Throw that out there. So I'm going to ask you to throw your ideas in the chat, but also please start raising your hand, because I know with all of our people here online, there are a lot of good ideas. And if you have an idea that you think you'd like to share with others, hey, here's a good way to start. At the Church of the Advent, I always go back to the Church of the Advent because it was, I'll be honest, I'm biased. It was one of my favorite parishes to be a part of ever. So yeah, one of the things I remember doing there was there was, I don't remember who it was, but there were a few people who baked some cakes and brought to the local firehouse. Just a kind of reach out some sweets and say, hey, we care about you. It doesn't have to be very complicated, but it builds relationship, and it builds it early, it builds it before disaster, and then in your local setting, you can find ways to do partnership in your own way. So let's see, what have we got here? Create planning committee, nice. Report to our parish council, yep. Good to get them on board. Continue to share good practices, and that's what I'm hoping we're going to be able to do when I write up a report from this work, that we can share all of the ideas together. Clara.
I'm going to boldly and shamelessly draw your attention, if you haven't already done so, to our Ecclesiastical province website. If you haven't already gone there, it's called province-bcyukon.anglican.ca. And on that website, some of you already have had access to the emergency preparedness resources. And we've been building up that website on all kinds of things, but there's a toolkit and links to just about every agency and organization in BC and Yukon, so that if you're not sure who do I reach out to or talk to in our geographical area, I direct you there. And the template for the toolkit talks about all the steps involved in what we're doing today and brainstorming. And it might feel overwhelming when you look at the toolkit, but you can pick and choose and decide what makes sense for you and how you will use it. And in it, it talks about, you got to review this every year. Like, it's not something you put in a binder and leave it up there for 20 years. This is an active, ongoing, dynamic document. So there it is.
I put it in the chat box.
Okay, thank you for that, Kate and Clara. And I believe Sandra Bouchard has got her hand up there. Just gotta, you'll have to unmute yourself, Sandra. Oh, there you go.
Clara, if you could, please, could you put that address up on the chat so we can copy it?
Yes, it is in the chat. Kate put it up for us. So if you scroll through the chat, you will find that link.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, a lot of really good ideas coming in here to the chat box. It was mentioned earlier on about an open house with local groups. To build that relationship, plan a safety day at the church, inviting the public. I like that. Again, thinking outside of the box. It's going to involve doing things that we have not done before, but things that come naturally to us. We are at our heart a welcoming and compassionate space. At least I hope we are. So leaning forward with those strengths, we can build good relationships. Hosting ESS emergency preparedness training events for your community. Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, lots of really good ideas there. And again, the website and the preparedness tools, very, very good resource to look at as well. But here's where I'm not going to disagree with Clara, because I know better, but I am going to say this work takes people and relationship. We need the resources as well. We need to have those things available to us to help direct us and give us ideas. But the truth is responding and working in partnership is person work, is relationship work, is compassionate relationship work. And so it involves taking those first steps either individually within a community or as a community to build relationships and partnerships. Otherwise, and I've heard this said before, otherwise it becomes a dusty idea or a dusty binder on a shelf somewhere, or an agreement, a memorandum of understanding that nobody realized was out of date, or some people didn't even know existed. If the relationship is not living, a living relationship, then it's not a relationship at all. Is there going to be another session down the road, a follow-up in progress, if any? Hey, that's a really good question, and that's something only your ecclesiastical province can answer. I'll leave that at there, but I will make a few comments with regards to that in my closing points. So we'll move on to what I'm calling the dismissal. How do we follow up with the work that has begun here? Because there's been a lot of really good work done in the past 2 hours. This has been absolutely amazing. What we've been able to accomplish just in 2 hours today, just in sharing ideas. My commitment to you is this: I'm going to continue to work with any and all of you who wish to build on the conversation today. So don't hesitate to reach out. I can't tell you the how. I really can't, but I'm more than willing to be a person to bounce ideas off, because I have heard so many stories and know so many stories. I can try to help, but it's a matter of what you want to do at the end of the day and how far you're willing to go in building relationships. That's really going to be the key. I've entitled this last part Dismissal for that reason, because the workshop might be coming to an end, but the work begins. You're being sent out into the world in many ways, like we do at the end of worship, to live out the mission. I'm going to ensure that in the next couple of weeks, you're all going to receive 3 things from Kate, from me through Kate. Number 1 is a questionnaire, and that questionnaire is going to help me to evaluate this workshop so that I can make it tighter and make it as good as I can. And also it's going to include some questions for research purposes so that I can continue the research in this area. So number 1 is going to be a questionnaire. Number 2, you're all going to receive a PowerPoint, which is going to have all the main points that I touched today. So I know a lot of you are keeping notes, which is good. It's good because it helps you think about things when you write them down, but you will receive a PowerPoint with all the main points from today. And the third thing you're going to receive once I have it complete, and it might take a little bit more than a week or 2 to do, is I'm going to go through this recording and all the chat, and I'm going to build a report back to the Ecclesiastical province of BC and the Yukon, summing up what was shared today, and to even I'll do some analysis and make some suggestions with regards to ways forward that may address as many of the concerns as I can that were expressed by you today. So that being said, I'd like Kate, if you could throw up slide 12, and I'm going to have my last part of my sermon for today. It's the longest sermon I've ever preached. is awesome. I feel like I'm a Baptist. All right. No, I hope we're all laughing at that. I have a lot of Baptist friends. So one of the most problematic phrases used in disaster management is, whoop, whoop, whoop. We're all over the place. Whoop. There you go. Almost there. There you go. Thank you, Kate. That happens sometimes. One of the most problematic phrases I hear is that of acts of God. It's written in insurance policies. It's written in FEMA documents. It is, it's all over the place. Acts of God, and the images on the screen there are what they're talking about. These hazardous events, like God looks around and says, hey, I'm going to send a hurricane here, and I'm going to make this volcano erupt. I'm going to have an earthquake here and throw a couple of tornadoes down this way. See how many people I can kill today. Acts of God. I don't like the phrase, but unfortunately it's part of our vernacular. But I want to change that language. I want to challenge us to change that language. And so if you could just move ahead to the next slide. Because I believe that the acts of God are those things which happen in response to and in preparation for disaster to help our communities to mitigate, to prepare, to respond, and to recover from these events which cause so much havoc in our lives. The acts of God ultimately are what we do in response to these perceived needs. Oh, I like it. A quote from Mr. Rogers: when terrible things happen, look for the people who are helping. Yeah, that's exactly it, because that's where the acts of God are actually happening. So I'd like to throw that word out for you to mull over in your head, those words, acts of God, and what does that mean for you as a parish, as a congregation, as a diocese, as an ecclesiastical province, as an individual, as a family. What are the acts of God that we can make real, that we can manifest in the world? Let's take those acts back from the way that we normally use that phrase. I want to thank all of you for your participation today. I really do. This has been absolutely amazing. I want to thank Archbishop Lynn and the leadership of the Ecclesiastical Province of British Columbia and the Yukon for this opportunity. I doubted if my research would ever produce any fruit at the end of the day. All academics have the same fear that their thesis is going to end up on a shelf gathering dust, but it's so nice to see this issue being engaged on a larger level. I want to thank Clara for your clear yet firm guidance, which made this workshop possible, and Kate for your invaluable expertise for making this all run so smoothly. This is amazing to have a group this size be able to share as much as we have today. I want to thank offer a thank you to the Archbishop Lynn and Clara for providing support for any who may have been triggered today, and please feel free to reach out to them if you feel you've been triggered by anything. I'm humbled by your sharing, and I am confident that I've learned far more from you than you might have learned from me today. So thank you again. Thank you so much. And I'll hand things back over to Clara.
Thank you, John. I'm going to allow Archbishop Lynn to speak first, and then I will bring things to a close and a final prayer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. I know that Clara will add more words of thanks, but thank you, John, for pulling this together. And we have learned from each other, from all the chat box and the questions and the experience of everyone. I just want to say how much this, the Metropolitan gets to say, my heart is singing, seeing all of the province together, so from Yukon all the way, all 6 dioceses, and this large Zoom screen, really, we are the body of Christ and we cannot do it all alone, but it is heartening to see people across the province sharing ideas and working together. So, I mean, I do think if I dare promise, Clara, we will have some kind of follow-up together, because it is just encouragement for each of us in figuring out how do we go to our neighbors. To me, this is, we talked a lot at Lambeth last summer that renewal of the church is opening our doors to our neighbors. Just at a point when it's really, we get into survival mode and might turn inward, that only real antidote to that is to do what Jesus said and be prepared to recognize Christ in our neighbors, and most of all, our neighbors in need. So it's just been heartening to have this workshop. Thank you, John, for your networking ability and encouraging us to be out making relationships with our neighbors.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I echo Archbishop Lind. John, I knew the minute we had our first Zoom conversation when I said, what do you think? Could you come and do some teaching? And oh my gosh, I was writing furiously as he was speaking, and he just kept talking faster and faster, and you could just see the zeal and the passion, and you got a snapshot of that today. There were a couple of questions in the chat box that somebody said, oh, we missed the questions about internal resources and external resources. And I just want to name that. Not to worry, we will capture that information. And those are the kinds of questions that we're going to keep working on. And I think I can say on our behalf as a province that we're committed to continuing this conversation and looking for ways to connect with each other. It might have been hard for you to see who in your own diocese or territory was here today, but would you make an effort to reach out to each other? Because this is how we continue to build the conversation and relationships at the local level and not just at the provincial level. And so I say this is a both and for those things. And John, oh, my heart is full, my brain is reeling with ideas. And thank you for reminding me that the acts of God are what we do. And I just think that is, if nothing else that we take away from today, that when my brain went, of course. So thank you for that. Bless you. Bless you.
Thank you.
Friends.
I know there's one thing I did mean to say on behalf of the province. I do want to thank Clara and Kate and Joanne Forsyth for putting together the toolkit. They did a lot of excellent research, and so do go and look at that toolkit, because it's very well laid out for parishes to work on. So I just wanted to say that publicly. Thank you. Thank you.
Whew, my friends, let us pray. Oh God, our times are in your hand. In the midst of uncertainty, lead us by your never-failing grace as we seek to be agents of healing and hope. Walk with us through difficult times, watch over us in danger, and give to us a spirit of love and compassion for those who suffer and mourn. And finally, remind us that you have promised never to leave us, so that even in the valley of the shadow of death, your love may be felt through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Friends, go with God's blessings and stay tuned for more. Bye for now.